as Taylor just mentioned, my name is Sivan Zak, and I'm an associate here at Tully Rinckey within our education law practice group. I've been practicing education law for about 2 years now, and this is one of the most popular types of cases that we actually see in education law generally. But yeah, it's a manifestation determination review, as Taylor mentioned, so let's get into it. So what is a manifestation determination review? So an MDR, as we more popularly call them, is triggered when a child with a disability faces any type of suspension that lasts longer than 10 days in the school year. So this could either be one singular suspension that is 10 days or over 10 days, so it has to be 11 days or longer, or it can be multiple suspensions that take place over the course of a period of time that lead up to more than 10 days. So if in the first week of September you received a 4-day suspension, and then in August received another 6-day suspension, that next suspension, let's say this week you got a 2-day suspension, that together adds up to more than 10 days, and that would trigger the MDR if your child is disabled. So during the MDR, the main purpose of the MDR is to figure out the answer to 2 questions. Those questions are, is there a connection between the behavior that led to the suspension and the child's disability? And did the school follow the child's current IEP, or what we call a BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan? So if not, to that second question, did the behavior happen because the child was not receiving the behavior intervention plan or the IEP as specified? And an important piece of this is that, not all children have BIPs in place, but some of them really need it. And so if you are able to prove that the school district was on notice that your child should have had a BIP in place, that can be a sufficient argument to say that the school has not been providing services, and that could prompt a yes to that second question. So if the answer to either of these questions is yes, then the behavior is determined to be a manifestation of the child's disability, and the child is returned to school immediately. So if it is a manifestation, you want to see that expungement. You want to see the child returning to school as soon as possible. It should really be the next day that school is in session. So if it's a Friday that the MDR takes place, your child should be returning to school on that Monday. Next slide, please, Taylor. So when are MDRs done? There are really 3 circumstances that the educational institution is required to hold an MDR. So these are as follows. A disabled child is given a suspension of more than 10 days in a row, which is what we had already discussed. A disabled child has been suspended 3 or more times within a 40-day period, and the total suspension days equals 11 days or more within that 40-day period. So we had discussed that as well in the previous slide. And there have been 2 or more suspensions within a school year that equal 11 or more days within that school year. And there's a pattern of behavior that caused the removals. So if you see that, at this point, we're about 2 months into the school year, and if you see that on a week-to-week basis, your child is being removed from school, having suspensions, having a lot of behavior concerns that lead to suspensions, these are all the kinds of things that would trigger an MDR and require the MDR team to take a look at the plan that's in place, what the child's BIP is like, if they have one at all, and if they don't have a BIP, then what's called a functional behavior assessment really should be conducted. And based on the results of the functional behavior assessment, or FBA, a BIP should be developed. So what really a manifestation determination review comes to is kind of like a quasi-IEP meeting, where you're really taking a deep dive into the child's educational program and trying to determine if the behavior that resulted in a suspension caused the suspension, obviously, but then also taking a look at the child's program as a whole and determining what changes need to be made, if any. Next slide, please. So who can you bring to an MDR meeting? A lot of people will say that they believe it's just that school CSE team, that the child's IEP team is who needs to be at the meeting. But actually, I always encourage clients to bring additional individuals that work with the child outside of school to that meeting as well. So that can be any doctors that you have, any psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. If your child has a one-to-one aide that works with them all the time, you could request that that person attend as well. You could also have a representative from the school district who's familiar with your child and interpret their behavior. Chances are these three individuals listed here, the school psychologist, school social worker, and the teacher, will already be in attendance at the MDR meeting. But if they're not, I would definitely recommend that they do attend. Because these are people that work with your child day in and day out, and they are the ones that experience the behaviors. So they have a really interesting perspective to provide to the table, and can really discuss what they are seeing in the school building and can assess whether or not any changes need to be made, as they're the ones who are also implementing the plan. I would also say that any individual from your child's school, like a speech teacher, if they work with one, occupational therapist, physical therapist, anyone who really has interaction with your child throughout the day should really be attending. And lastly, we always recommend that you have legal counsel and legal representation for these. It can get very daunting and very complex when you have to really assess your child's program as a whole. And there are actually a lot of legal arguments that can be made here, especially with, the BIP, if you can show that the district knew that your child should have a BIP and did not institute one. That's a legal argument you could make to really change that second question into a yes rather than a no. So I always say to bring an attorney to these, to have an educational advocate at these. There are some situations where you can even have both. So I think the more people in your corner, the easier it becomes to attend the manifestation determination review, especially more people who can advocate on your behalf. It's already very stressful when your child is facing discipline to then have to also try and make legal arguments and assess their education as a whole. Okay, Taylor, next slide, please. So how do you as a parent advocate for your child in a manifestation determination review? The first step is really to gather all of the pertinent documentation that you have regarding your child. So that would include their IEP, any behavior intervention plans, any evaluations that were conducted either by the school district or privately. So if you take your child to a psychologist who conducts an evaluation, or you have therapy notes from their psychiatrist because they, see a psychiatrist weekly or monthly, whatever the case may be. These are all really relevant documents that you want to have the IEP team review at the MDR, because they're really going to shed some light as to, what behaviors your child is exhibiting, and how those behaviors are manifesting, and if they can link the behavior that causes suspension to your child's disability, it's likely going to be in those documents. So we always say compile all of those documents and bring them with you. So on top of that, about the evaluations and your child's disability, you should also have any incident reports from the suspending incident, any disciplinary records. So if your child has a pattern of suspensions, you should bring those as well. And any classroom observations that would be related to the behavior in question. And typically those classroom observations are taking place through the evaluations that are done by the CSC. So a psychological evaluation or a functional behavior assessment, those are taking a look at what your child is doing in real time in the classroom. They always, or most likely, will contain a classroom observation of your child so that they can see them in their natural environment. That's where those evaluations are the most beneficial anyway. So any of those documents really that you can provide to the CSC team to review will be helpful. And I would say have those documents also sent to your legal representation or your educational advocate and take a look through them with that person that you bring to the meeting, because you'll need to really connect the dots between all of the documents and the suspending behavior. So I would also say, in order to prepare, you should bring individuals who can help you in advocating for your child, like I just mentioned. So this could be any individuals that work with your child outside of school, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a doctor, a one-to-one aide, anyone who really works with your child in that outside environment. But also, I would say an educational advocate or attorney is crucial in these meetings. Otherwise, you can absolutely get railroaded by a CSE team who has perhaps already made up their mind. I mean, you go into this meeting and you don't really know, have they spoken about it before? Have they already determined that? That's not supposed to happen, but sometimes it can feel that way. And so you want to have that legal representation or an educational advocate with you. Another piece of this that I always tell clients to do is that obviously psychologists, doctors, psychiatrists are busy and they don't necessarily have 2 hours in their day to take out and come to this meeting. I would obtain any letters of support that you can from your child's doctors, physicians, anything that can provide support for this. So all of the documents that I had just mentioned that you should obtain for the MDR, I would also provide those to your child's doctor or psychologist, whoever you intend to have write a letter. Have them take a look at it and the incident reports and give their assessment based on what they know about your child. So you can always just submit the letter and perhaps the CSE will want to speak with the person who wrote the letter at a later time, and that's something you can always organize if needed, but these are really the essentials that you should bring with you. Okay, next slide, Taylor. So those were the essentials of the MDR. I know it wasn't terribly long, but it really is sort of at a basic level, very simple. The legal aspects of it, when you dig into the weeds, can get very complex, and that's the reason why so many parents struggle with these and they don't really feel like they have a say. The last kind of parting words I'll give for this is that these are really stressful and you can end up having multiple of these in a single school year. And I think that there's a lot to explore with a child's disability that school districts may not be willing to take a look at. So I would really emphasize that if you are facing an MDR, you receive a notice for one, you receive notice that your child is suspended, contact an education attorney as soon as you possibly can. There is typically a very quick turnaround on these, so your child will likely face a 5-day suspension first, and then they'll schedule the MDR to determine whether or not a longer suspension should take place. So definitely, let us know if you need any assistance with this, and thank you very much for joining.